Welcome to Bad Dog Agility, a podcast helping you reach all of your dog agility goals. Whether it's competing under the bright lights of the televised finals at Westminster or successfully navigating a homemade course in your own backyard, we'll bring you training tips, interviews, and news about the great sport of dog agility. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
I'm ready. The show starts with your hosts, Jennifer, Esteban, and Sarah.
I'm Jennifer.
I'm Esteban.
And I'm Sarah, and this is episode 322. Today's podcast is brought to you by hitaboard.com and the new Teeter Teach It, an easy-to-use tool that controls the amount of tip on your teeter so you can introduce motion to your dog in a gradual way. Go to hitaboard.com for the new Teeter Teach It and other training tools and toys. Use discount code VDA10 to get 10% off your order. That's hitaboard.com. Today, we are, first of all, back from our annual summer break. So welcome back to the podcast, Jen, Esteban. And today we have a very special guest to the podcast, Dr. Brittany Schesler. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here again.
Did everybody have a good summer?
Pretty good. It's lovely up in the Pacific Northwest.
We had a busy summer. Ethan finishing up second grade, going into third, had a birthday. It's been busy. He's at the age where it's all activities all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we just sent our oldest to college this summer. So that was our big summer event. But, we're in September now. Consider it kind of back to school season and back to the podcast season. And so today we're going to be talking about mental management for the handler after a dog injury. So this is all of the emotions and the feelings that we as handlers are dealing with when we're coming back to competition with a dog who has previously been injured. And I have a lot to say on this topic, but I want to set it up by talking to Brittany about the experience she had with her dog. Now, I feel like Brittany is extra unique here because she is a vet, like veterinary medicine vet. But she has also been on the side of being the handler with a dog who is coming back from injury. So she can kind of see this from both sides of the equation. So Brittany, tell us a little bit about Ticket specifically and everything that you went through with Ticket, with surgeries, rehab, and then coming back to the ring.
So Ticket is a Sheltie. She is now almost 14. But when she was 2.5, maybe just 3, she tore her first cruciate ligament. So just happened sometimes, had surgery. Everything was perfect. 6 months, at 8 weeks, she was pronounced perfect, ready to go. So the first time this happened, we went and did her rehab, we did everything, and 0 problems. Like, her physical therapist were like, she's in the 95th percentile. She's great. And she did fabulous. And then 6 months later, she came up limping on the other leg. And 50% of dogs that tear a cruciate ligament will go on to tear the second the ligament on the other leg in 6 months or greater. And she did exactly that. So she needed another surgery on the opposite leg. But this time when she had that surgery, the surgeon came out afterwards and he's like, it was a bigger injury. There was a little bit more going on than with the first one, which was just a normal partial tear. So we did the same things. We started rehab, but she just wasn't recovering the same. And at about 12 weeks, I was like, she's just not right. We went back for another recheck and the surgeon was like, well, let's go take the hardware out. Maybe it's bothering her and kind of see how it is. So that was her third surgery. And then it did not help. If anything, she got worse. And so we went back to our original surgeon who looked at it and said, I think we need to put the hardware back in. So she had another surgery. And then we were rehabbing from that surgery. And one day went in and I mentioned to her physical therapist, I'm like, she just seems a little bit worse the last week or so. And she's like, well, let's not do rehab today. Let's take an x-ray. And she had 3 broken screws. So they were like, we need to take this out immediately. So she had another surgery. But when they went in, what they found was that everything was completely unstable. Her bone was not healing. and they did not know why. She had negative cultures. They did a histopathology to see if she had cancer in there. Everything was normal, but they had to take the hardware out. And when they did, there's just bone pieces floating around. So she had many hours of surgery, came out with an external fixator. So she had metal pins going into her skin from the outside. She was in a giant bandage, and they were trying to stabilize basically her broken leg at this point that way, which also did not work. So then they put her in a splint and were trying to figure out what they were going to do. And ultimately what happened was she got a human product that they were using experimentally. And he's like, let me get this stuff. It helps bone healing in humans. We don't really know about dogs, but it was that, or at that point, if that didn't work, they were talking about fusing her knee or amputating her leg. So,
well, and I just want to break in here real quick to kind of set a little bit of the stage that this is an extremely high drive, very, very fast Sheltie that had not only a lot of potential, but a lot of desire to do the sport. Like this dog is not necessarily going to be super happy being non-active.
100%. So out of all my dogs, she was the one who had the most potential. She was the easiest to train. She was the easiest dog I've ever had in terms of she was a little bit dumb. So, she would do the same thing 20 times exactly the same way. She was never oh, maybe I should do something different. She was oh, okay, let's just keep doing it the same way. She just was perfectly happy to do it a million times. Out of all my dogs, she was not going to be a good couch potato.
Right.
So we're at this point where it's well, we're going to try this surgery. So we did, and it worked. The bone morphogenic protein is what it's called, healed her leg. So her bone finally healed. This was a year. This all happened over a year. So a year later, she had this surgery where they put the BMP in and her bone finally healed. But she had to be in a splint for 12 weeks total, which is not good because when you're in a splint for that long, you lose range of motion. So when we got to rehab again, so basically she was in a splint for another month after that surgery because we were basically trying to do everything. So did not want to take a chance that the bone was not stable. When she came out and we took the splint off and we went to rehab that day, that's the first time I cried because her leg, it was like a peg leg. Her toes were pointed down. Her leg was completely straight. It was devastating to see her like that. And at that point, I'd given up agility a long time in this process. I was I just want my dog to have a leg. And we got in there and my physical therapist, who's the same one the whole time that we worked with, is no, today's a happy day. Today's the day we start getting better. And she's let's just see what happens. So we did super intense physical therapy and she came back. She gained range of motion. She is not normal, but again, this is a dog that had so much drive to do agility, to do something that I was well, let's just see. So I guess this was probably about a year and a half, maybe a little bit less than that after that first surgery that we kind of started oh, she's walking, oh, she's running, oh, she's sprinting. Oh, now maybe we can wrap around things and actually start to get back into agility type stuff.
Right. And I feel this is where when people go through something, so I don't think very many people have been through something like that. I mean, it's one of the reasons that it's so interesting talking to you because this is really kind of on the extreme end. Right. But when people go through any kind of injury, then I don't know that they're always expecting how hard it is after you've finished recovery, you've finished rehab, and you're essentially pronounced healthy and ready to go. And they think that that's going to be the end. And that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today is it's kind of the beginning of the next phase. And it's the next phase, in my opinion, is most hard on the handler themselves, right? The dog has now been released by the vet to do stuff, to do agility. They're happy. They're doing agility. And so then tell us what it felt like when you take this dog and the history that your dog had, and now you were asking her to do athletic things, and like how that felt and like what went through your mind, like as you are doing agility, after this big long ordeal.
So it was just like the very first time her physical therapist was like, okay, you can do straight line sprints. I was like, can we? It's like running in a straight line, because Ticket only does things one speed. Like right. you can't, she's not going to take it easy. She's going to, you ask her to go get a dead toy. She's going to go as fast as she can to the dead toy. And that's her personality. And I'd do like 2 or 3 reps and I'd be like, okay, that's enough, and even though I was supposed to do like 5, and then once we actually started adding agility, it was like, I didn't want to put the bars up. It was like, well, I don't, do we, really need to do that? And like, all I was trying to do was watch her. Like the first time we did like a baby dog walk that was like 8 inches off the ground, like I felt physically ill. Like it was terrifying and it was nauseating, trying to bring her back to agility, because I was just terrified something was going to happen to her, but she wanted to do something so bad. Like she was crazy all the time. Like she wanted to run around the backyard, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to leash her the rest of her life. So, we just kept at it a little bit at a time.
Right. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk about, because I feel like I've given a version of this speech to multiple people, including, by the way, Brittany, way back then when Ticket was coming back, because Brittany used to live here in Texas with me and Esteban, and we used to be training partners. And so we were there during all of this, and we would go and we would set something up and we would be doing agility. And I remember telling Brittany, like, you cannot watch her. You can't watch her. Like, look at the tape after, but you cannot both be her mom and her veterinarian watching her with those hawk-like eyes, and also be her handler telling her where to go. And so what the logical thought process that I try to take people through is, in my opinion, you are more likely to cause a problem with your dog who's coming back from injury by doing things weird, by not handling like you normally do, or if you're watching, you're likely to be late on your cues. So now imagine you're asking for a turn and you don't properly prepare the dog for the turn because all of your timing is off, because you're spending all of your time watching your dog. And now they try and put in this Herculean effort to make a tight turn. That's when your dog is going to get injured or re-injured. So, my logical argument is you are way better off running them like they're healthy and then checking the tape. And I remember telling you that at the time, like, you just have to let go and run and trust that she's going to be okay. And even if she wasn't okay, what are the chances that she's going to be not okay in a way that you could somehow do something about it in the moment, right? And so that's where I want you to now put your vet hat on and say, okay, like, we understand. And that's why I think your story is so great, because you know these things as a vet, but you also, have all the anxiety of a dog mom, right? Yes. So, as your vet hat, like, what things might happen, and what could you do about it? Because I suspect that it's not that much that you could really do anything about it.
Yeah, there's very, very little. So like if you're doing a late front cross and they wipe out, right, because they didn't know the turn was coming, there's nothing you're going to do to stop that. Maybe the only thing I can kind of think is maybe if they were like coming off the dog walk and you happen to be right there, maybe you could catch them if it like a sheltie, but like that's literally more just chance and being in the exact right spot. Right.
Right.
But the dog walk was the scariest thing I asked her to do. Like asking her to go up in the air was the hardest. And I remember going over to Steph's house and working on her dog walk and just being like, having a really hard time doing it.
Right.
Because it's just like, to me, that was like the most uncontrolled. Like if she didn't know where her leg was and she fell, to me, that was the greatest risk of injury right there. Right. It was like she fell on that leg wrong.
And I don't think I've ever asked you this, but like, did that feeling go away, or did you always, her entire rest of her career, have some level of anxiety, or did you move past it at some point?
It mostly went away. Like it's just something like you can't stay in that like state of arousal or whatever it is, like all the time. There were a couple of times. So like the very first show back, all I wanted was like, I wanted her to have 4 legs on the ground at the end of the run, because that dog would run on 3 legs. And I may not realize it until the end, but I was like, I just want her to finish with 4 legs, and then with 4 legs on the ground, not one falling off. And when she made Westminster finals, I was like super, obviously there's a lot going on there, but I was very much like, please let her finish this run with 4 feet on the ground, because it was on TV and all of that. And I'm like, please, like that was, the whole run was nerve wracking, but those times were probably the ones where I was like most started to think about it again, just because I think it's just because of pressure in general, Right. So now I wanted to talk to Jen and Esteban, because I know both of y'all have run dogs that have come back from some sort of injury. And so I kind of wanted to get like the echo of like how that affected you. And then I know, Jen and I were talking before this about being on the other side as instructors and kind of the advice that we give. So Jennifer, like what is, do you resonate with the anxiety of that first time back in the ring?
Yeah, for me, it was a very specific dog incident, recovery moment in time. I know exactly where I was, who was there when I was first coming back from an injury, right? I was jumping at a lower height. And for me, it wasn't so much like watching to make sure that he was okay. It was that I was just like going slow. Like I remember running tentative, and I was like, oh, well, if I run slow, he'll go slower and that will be safer. And that was not the case, right? So similar to what Brittany said, I was running a high drive Sheltie who wanted to go. Me going slower did not make him slower. What it did is it caused my information to be late. And I was stopped. It was actually at a world team practice. This was way back in 2007. And they stopped me and they're like, look, he looks fine. You have a lot of really knowledgeable, experienced people watching you. You need to run as though nothing's wrong. If we see anything, we'll holler. But you being late is making things worse. It is giving him late information. It's causing him to jerk his body over the bar. It's causing him to wipe out on a turn because he doesn't know where he's going. So it wasn't that I was like watching him and then therefore getting distracted in that sense. It was that I was like actively trying to go slow. And I think as an instructor, I see that so much. I'll even see people tell me in an email for video feedback and say, hey, I'm running cautiously. The bars are low. We're just coming back from injury, just a little background. And I can see it. I can see so much of the handling being late. And I empathize. However, the being late, the being slow, the delay in information, then risks making things worse. So I told him that, kind of my feedback for people is, if you've been working with a vet, if you've been doing rehab, if you have been given the green light and everybody from the medical side is saying, okay, you are good to do whatever it is that you're doing, half height jumps, straight lines, sequences no more than 8 obstacles. If they're saying to do it, then you need to do it for real, not half-heartedly, not tentatively. And if it makes you feel better, do 1 rep with the camera on, pause, make sure they're sound. As Brittany said, make sure all 4 feet are on the ground. Go watch your video. Does it look good? Okay, run the next drill. If you didn't see something that you liked, stop right then and there. But there's not going to be anything in the moment that you're going to be able to necessarily do, as we already discussed. So it really is doing your dog a disservice to risk all that late information and then risk making things worse. So been there, done that, learned it the hard way. And now I get to kind of come full circle and tell people the same thing that was told to me, to trust the rehab, trust the recovery, and run with the best information. If you tell them where to go, they can prep their body. They can do what is necessary to make that turn, to make that line nice and safe.
Yeah, exactly. And Esteban, so what was your experience like?
Yeah, I think I've had a couple dogs come back from injury, but I think the most recent one that I'll probably remember the best is Gitchy. So she's the most recent dog I think that was running in high level competitions, and golden retriever, and as many goldens do, had shoulder issues, right? So I think maybe even at some point she had issues with both shoulders, and I think at her peak she was in the middle of like a great run of like 3 straight like NAC finals, and she wasn't the kind of dog who really made mistakes, just the occasional bar here or there. And she ended up having surgery, and she got it all. I think we did PRP.
Yes, PRP.
Stem cells.
Yep.
And Susan, who was her co-owner. So we co-owned her at the time so that I'd be able to run her at tryouts. But rehabbed her. They worked with a great therapist. They had great veterinary care over in Louisiana, and got her back into running shape. And so when she came back to me, I think the one thing that I did do that I think was probably different from most people is I did not alter the way I ran. And
that's how I remember it too.
That's okay. I just wanted to be sure, because to me it was so long ago, but it was like not an issue to me at all. And so for me, it was about the psychological aspect of running that dog again after injury, right? And the question was, could they be as good as they were before? And at what point, if they weren't going to be as good, did you need to think about moving them down in height, right? So Gitchy naturally jumped 20 inches in AKC. International competition was 24 inches. And, is this a dog you're going to run at preferred? Or if she's not able to jump even 20 inches, should she be doing agility at all, right? So I think there were some ethical considerations here. And so those things weighed very heavily on my mind. I felt like after that surgery, at that point, even to have the surgery, I think is an ethical, not dilemma, but it's something that you think about, right? Like, am I doing the right thing even to bring a dog back? I think for some dogs, the very young, perhaps, right? So Ticket certainly falls in that category. You do that, and they kind of have this long life and career ahead of them, that would be different if you didn't opt for certain, surgical solutions, right? But Gitchy, I think she had just passed her prime, like the absolute peak of her career, where she could run around and compete with border collies. And so practices were all about me doing a front cross and looking behind me and being surprised that she wasn't there. And then I'd have to ask somebody, did she slip? Did she fall? Or is this just normal? And old fast Gitchy would be in the exact same spot. And I just really got out there ahead or created very good separation. I wasn't sure. And I didn't really trust the spatial relationships that we had honed, fine-tuned, and I knew absolutely where she would be and where I could be on any course, and we really just didn't make mistakes.
So it was like less anxiety, and it was more that you had to redevelop your whole visualization and understanding of where she was going to be.
No, I guess I'm not saying it very well, but there was anxiety about that, right? I imagine it, I think all of us here have played sports, right? And Brittany, Jennifer, and I have done it at a very high level and serious level. It's like when you have an injury and you come back and you're not quite sure what you can do and how hard to push yourself. And if you could really go all out, right? It's a little bit in your head, and it was a little bit in my head on her behalf, because I knew she would try her best. And I felt like I had to be her conscience, her, advocate. Like, hey, if she's not hitting X, Y, and Z spots on the course, and maybe that means she's having an issue, right? Maybe these are dogs that mask their pain in order to continue in the sport, right? Yep. And so it's not like she would lying to me in a sense, right? but they just want to do the thing and they want to do it with you. And, that's what we love about dogs. And that's what we love about dog agility, right? The bond, right? And so for me, it was a real ethical question, and it weighed very, very heavily on me. And I remember the last national she went to, and I didn't even want to run the final. Like, she made the final and miraculously kept all the bars up. And she just plowed through some stuff in the final, right? She essentially ran it clean, except for, the 5 bars she dropped. And we still came back one more year. And I don't know that I want, if I could do it all over again, obviously I wouldn't have done that last year. Yeah. And then I did not drop her down to prefer. I know she did a couple of preferred runs back in Louisiana, I think with a young junior handler, kind of like in a fun, learner kind of way, maybe some novice courses or something. But, with me, like, her career, like, at that point was over. So, I think it's different. So some of you are going to be in my boat. Some of you are going to be in Jennifer and Brittany's boat. Yeah. Right. And so I think you need to have a very good sense of where your dog is in their career, and you need to reconcile and really think about what your goals are for that dog and for yourself. And I think as long as we all put the dogs first, there's no real wrong answer, right? You might make mistakes, right? You might do something where, if you could do it over again, you wouldn't do that. Like, I wouldn't have run her that last year. At that point, I just felt like, yeah, I don't think I should have done that, and I think she had just turned like 7.5 and 7.5, 8. By 8, she was done. Absolutely done. And I was like, no, she will never, there's no reason to run her preferred. There's no reason she should ever do a weave pull again. And she was just done at 8. And she's still alive today. So one of 2 litter mates left from that litter, doing great, 13 years old, just had her birthday a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So happy birthday to my baby, Gitchy.
That's right.
And I'm going to try and get down to New Orleans to see her sometime in the next few months. So I think it's very normal to have this kind of anxiety, but I think as long as you go through the advice, and you are taking the dog into consideration, you really center the dog and their health and their well-being and your relationship, I don't think you can really make a bad decision. Yeah. Even if it kind of doesn't go your way, right? You try and run them a little bit and, hey, it's not quite right, and you end up having to retire them. Yep. Like, that's okay. It's okay that you gave it a shot. It's okay that they had the surgery, right? And maybe if you retire them and years later, you're like, maybe I did a little prematurely, right? Mostly people get sad like toward the end of their dog's, life. And they're like, oh, maybe we could have done a little bit more. Maybe we could have done one more season. Maybe we could have been at the international height for one more year or something like that. The dog's not going to care. Remember, it's not their reason for existence, shall we say. Sure, we love that soundbite, right? When they interview you, you win some big run and you're like, yeah, they live for dog agility. They don't really live for dog agility, right? Even though it looks like a lot of these dogs, some of them, live for dog agility, but they really live for, I think, being around us and working with us and that sort of thing. So,
and we do make it fun.
Yeah. You keep the perspective. I think you're going to be okay. But personally, that's what I struggled with the most. So it's less about handling. And I guess related to that, the other thing that I should say, I know I took this in an emotional direction, is that I cut back a lot on reps and training. So if you set up this huge international course or whatever, getting things ready, like I did not run it like we did before, right? And then instead of taking like 3 turns, I would take 2. If it was 2 turns, I would take just 1, and then it would be good enough. Like back in the day, or when she's like 4 or 5 years old, you're like, hey, I'm going to run this, and I'm going to run it a second way and a third different way, and this kind of stuff. All that nonsense stopped. Right. It was just about preservation and longer warm-ups and proper cool downs, and was she getting rested? And did she have the proper nutrition, massage, chiropractor? Like, we did all of that, and so it was the focus was very, very different. And the amount of work that they were putting in training was very, very different. So that's what was constantly on my mind.
Right. So we're going to wrap up here, but there's one other scenario that I wanted to just touch on very, very briefly, because in my mind, the answer is exactly the same as what we've talked about. We've talked about big injuries and coming back from big, obvious injuries. But I think the other thing that I've seen, especially as an instructor with lots of students, are things that are very, very small and very, very minor. And sometimes you don't even know what it was, right? So let me paint a picture that I think maybe a lot of people have had the experience of, which is, the dog just comes up a little bit lame after a full weekend of trialing, right? Nothing obviously wrong. You take them to the vet, they get a clear bill of health. They can't find anything wrong. Maybe even after one day, the dog is no longer limping. And owners are terrified that they're going to hurt their dog or they're going to break their dog or, what should they do? And so I think there's a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. And one was that when you do decide to get back to agility, again, my advice is exactly the same as coming back from the big injury, which is you cannot watch your dog and run at the same time. You've got to run your dog regular and then check the videotape. But Brittany, as a vet, I wanted you to just rattle off 3 to 5 completely benign things that could cause a dog to have a slight limp for 1 hour and then be fine the next day. I think we talked about this at the time and it was it could be an ant bite between their pads. It could be what are some of the benign things? Because I think everybody immediately thinks like you did, right? Oh my gosh, my dog is about to have a CCL tear, right? But there's lots of other things that could be going on that are really not a big deal.
3 to 5 things. You're really putting her on the spot.
I know, I did.
Right? So I will say the number one thing that I see is just a muscle strain. Literally it's half the time they come to see me and they're not even limping anymore, but they're they were limping really bad yesterday. And it's we do it all the time. Dogs are going to do it too. You're just going to step wrong. It's going to feel bad. And then it's going to be fine. They can pad abrasions. So dry grass or sometimes really brittle, abrasive turf. You can, get soreness there. Stickers, seriously, the number of stickers I have fished out of dogs' pads that were making them limp. Well, yeah. So certainly insect bite or a bee sting or something like that. I don't know why, but we have a lot of bees on the grass around here. And I see them in my backyard and I'm why are there bees in the grass? There's no flowers, but there's bees. So I could definitely see dogs doing that. What else?
Just this week, we were out in the yard and Swift came up lame. So he's trotting around with all the dogs and he comes up limping 3-legged. I'm oh my God, what'd he do? Because, he's almost 11. So I was all worried. And he had stepped in a big pile of sap and it was on his foot and got all the hair between his pads. Of course, then I was oh my God, I pull it off of him and then I have it all over me. He was thanks, Mom, and trotted away just fine. So as also B tears her pads like it's her job. I always check feet first. I always check feet first. I have a lot of experience. Dew claws too. That's one that always gets. People check the main toes, but sometimes not look up high. Right now, Surprise actually has a bruise, a dew claw nail. So those are always my go-tos when I first see some lameness. Is checking feet.
Right.
Yes,
for sure. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes they'll fake it just to mess with you.
Right.
No, I'm just kidding.
Right.
No, they don't. Seriously, the number of times people come in and they're I think they're just faking it for attention. I'm no, that's not. No.
Okay. So faking it is not on the list. Faking it is not on the list. But the point that I wanted to make is that it's not always going to be something catastrophic. No. So if you have done your due diligence, if you've checked them out, if you've, taken them to the vet, and if they're cleared to go, and if they look fine, just go and run them as if they're fine. Anything else is really a disservice to them as the handler, as the person who is supposed to be leading the way. You have to give them good information. So that is the 30-second takeaway that I want everybody to have here is that if you're going to run for real, give the dog the best information that you can. And you've always got videotape and you've always got your vet, your rehab vet, your, therapist and things like that to make sure that your dog stays sound. So with that, we will wrap up this podcast. And really quickly, I will just announce that we will have the Invitational Prep Course for those of you who have been waiting for it. That'll be coming up in the next day or two. So if you're on our mailing list, you should get an email and you can check Facebook. But that's a really popular course that we do every year around the AKC Invitational. So it's 6 weeks of exercises, small space exercises with lots of demo and analysis. We have that coming up. And then we also have coming up in about a month is the AWC Agility World Championship. We run a course with that, the AWC Experience, where you can follow along. We'll have 5 athletes that we're following, covering all 4 jump heights. And you get to see their runs from the Agility World Championship, but also their analysis of their runs. So you get to hear directly from the athletes what they were thinking, why they ran it the way they did, analysis of any mistakes. It's a really, really cool course that we did a few years before COVID. And then this is our first year back after COVID. So really excited about that. And you can find those on the Facebook page and on our mailing list. And that's it for this week's podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsor, hitaboard.com. Happy training.
Thank you for listening to Bad Dog Agility. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information, updates, and links to all our socials, just check out our website, www.baddogagility.com. If you haven't already signed up for our email subscription, we would love to have you join the BDA community. Until next time, take care.